Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sela Social Studies. So today we're going to be covering the government's way to try to help Southerners, poor white Southerners, and the newly freed slaves, and that's called the Freedmen's Bureau. So the Civil War ended, and with the passing of the 13th Amendment, there were about 4 million newly freed slaves in the United States. Remember, the purpose of Reconstruction was to assist these emancipated and rebuild the South using the combined efforts of the whites and the blacks. There were millions of free slaves who had no money, no land, or no housing. So the question remained that if the wealthy planters in the South were not going to help these African Americans adapt to their new life, then who will? The government was aware of these arising issues in the South and had a plan that they felt that would succeed. And here it is. The Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. This was known simply as the Freedmen's Bureau, and it was established by Congress in 1865. Its main purpose was to provide the relief for millions of freed people and certain poor people, primarily those poor whites in the South. The Freedmen's Bureau provided food, housing, medical aid. It established schools, and it offered legal assistance as well. The Bureau also attempted to settle many of the emancipated land confiscation issues that General William T. Sherman ordered through Special Field Order number 15, which gave 40 acres of plantation and a mule to freed slaves. So the idea and the potential of the Freedmen's Bureau should have been limitless. This should have been no problem. Helping the millions of freed slaves and the poor whites in the South should not have been an issue to anybody. However, the Bureau was never able to live up to its potential due to a couple of different reasons that we're going to get to, and it included the lack of available personnel to run the agency, a lack of federal funding, and the politics of race intertwined with the politics of Reconstruction. And we're going to touch on all those. So the size of the Bureau had stretched to all 11 of the former Confederate states and the border states and was organized into specific districts. Each one of these districts was controlled by a commissioner, and there were no precedents on how the federal government should handle responsibilities regarding this huge refugee population, welfare programs, and housing reform. It was the Bureau itself that had set many of these precedents. So there was lots of opposition to the Freedmen's Bureau. From the beginning of the Freedmen's Bureau, it faced opposition from many sources. Many white Southerners who still believed that African Americans were inferior. They opposed any assistance given to the newly freed. After Lincoln was killed in 1865, newly appointed President Andrew Johnson also opposed the organization. The Bureau also suffered from within. People who supported the Bureau and people who worked within the organization disagreed on what types of assistance that needed to be given. Congress introduced this bill to extend the Bureau's tenure, and it gave it more legal powers. However, Andrew Johnson vetoed the legislation. He stated that the bill interfered with states' rights and it gave preference to Southern blacks, and that it was a cash vacuum sucking money from the federal government. Congress actually responded, remember, with those radical Republicans overriding the veto and passing a more slimmed-down version of the bill. Johnson was consistently feuding with these radical Republicans, and the Freedmen's Bureau suffered as a result. This is a Freedman School. You can see it's not the best-looking school, but it is a school. It did offer school for many newly freed slaves. So there were some successes and some failures of the Freedmen Bureau. Like I said, the Bureau met some substantial goals during its years of existence. However, each goal was met with an equally large failure. The Bureau was not successful as a whole organization because each location and each agent experienced different levels of success and achievement. The organization as a whole was underfunded and it was understaffed. At its peak, it only reached about 900 agents. And so these Bureau agents worked as social workers and were normally the lone representatives for the Southern blacks and poor whites, and were often attacked verbally and physically from whites, including the KKK. The Klan felt that the Bureau agents should not worry about federal issues and stop interfering in local affairs. Some agents fell victim to the attacks and became very weary of assisting Southerners. Others were incompetent and corrupt, but the majority were hardworking and brave agents who made incredible contributions to the success of the Freedmen. Some of the major successes of the Freedmen's Bureau was that it distributed food to millions of people, it built hospitals, and provided all that medical aid. It offered and provided legal aid by negotiating labor contracts for ex-slaves and settling labor disputes. It also helped former slaves legalize marriages and locate relatives, and assisted black veterans. The Bureau was also instrumental in establishing 3,000 schools for blacks and several universities like Howard University in Washington, D.C., Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, and Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. So what would end such a really good program for the freed people and the poor whites in the South? Well, the Freedmen's Bureau introduced the federal government into issues of social welfare and labor relations, and it lasted for 7 years between 1865 and 1872. And in mid-1872, a lack of funding, along with the pressure from the white Southerners and disinterest by Northerners, forced Congress to dismantle and end the Bureau. It was easy to say that these were the only reasons for the agency's downfall, but the facts need to be stated to show how the agency was built for failure. From the beginning of the agency, the Northerners were fully funding the agency, and they were quickly losing interest because it became so expensive to operate, and funds were running out, aiding to a struggling Northern economy. The lack of support overflowed into the amount of agents to support the Bureau, remember, reaching only 900 at its peak. One can debate whether the Freedmen's Bureau was a success or failure. It was able to provide the relief for Southern blacks and poor whites for a short period of time. However, it was never able to live up to its full potential. The race division in the Southern states was a mountain to overcome, and it came up short. It was not able to carry out all of its initiatives, and it failed to provide long-term protection for blacks or ensue any real measure of racial